and I feel, obviously, that he should have been convicted on the top charges of the predator charges.
Behind the glittering red carpet, it isn't glamour, it's the screams buried beneath checks and silence agreements. In 1997, a hotel room door quietly shut, and Rose McGowan's dignity was reduced to a $100,000 check. In a dark attic, a 7-year-old girl named Dylan Farrow says her childhood was taken from her surrounded by toys left scattered on the floor.
If you could tell us what happened that day.
I was taken to a small attic crawl space in my mother's country house in Connecticut.
In the middle of a lavish party, Brendan Fraser, once the king of the jungle on screen, found himself trembling before the hand of power, and then disappeared from Hollywood for nearly 2 decades. The spotlight never fades, it just hides the truth. And when the predators begin to fear, that's when the victims finally find their voice. Today, we reopen 10 of the most shocking cases to uncover what truly happened behind Hollywood's velvet curtain. The truth needs your voice to protect it. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment to stand with these brave survivors before we begin. 1. Rose McGowan, the warrior who tore apart the silence of NDS. Behind the cinematic classics of Miramax lay an empire fueled by fear, where Harvey Weinstein operated as if he were above the law. In 1997, the Sundance Film Festival, an event meant to be a professional milestone, became a life sentence for the spirit of young actress Rose McGowan. Legal records later revealed that a script meeting at the Stein-Eriksen Lodge was in fact a meticulously orchestrated trap. The moment the suite door locked, the mogul persona vanished, replaced by a ruthless predator. In her harrowing testimony before a New York court in 2020, Rose detailed the moment she was backed into a corner.
In the cult I grew up in, and then I was 1,000% shut out of that world.
There was no consent, no escape, only the suffocating pressure of a man twice her size. The assault was swift, yet devastating, leaving Rose McGowan trembling and paralyzed under a showerhead in utter revulsion moments later. She realized that in that room her dignity had been seized by a man who believed power could buy off any resistance. The cruelty of the Hollywood system became clear the moment Rose sought justice. Instead of legal protection, she faced an army of high-powered attorneys and former intelligence agents hired by Weinstein to clean up his transgressions. A $100,000 settlement was immediately proposed. In archival records, this was not listed as compensation for a crime, but as a non-disclosure agreement. NDA, a legal shackle forcing Rose to swallow her accusations or face bankruptcy through litigation. $100,000 for a human life, that was the price Hollywood set for the silence of a survivor. Evidence of Rose's exploitation and subsequent blacklisting lay in the shadows Weinstein quietly controlled. For 2 decades, Rose was isolated from her potential as a rising star. Renowned directors later admitted receiving whispers not to work with McGowan because she was too difficult. She was treated as a commodity to be traded then discarded when she showed defiance. Weinstein used his influence to stifle her professional breath, turning her into a cautionary tale for anyone daring to oppose him. In 2017, when she chose to go public on social media and cooperate with criminal investigators, Rose McGowan did more than break an NDA. She tore through the velvet curtain shielding a systemic, predatory process. Documents from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office confirmed her testimony as the vital link that sent Weinstein to prison with a 23-year sentence. Rose traded her image as a glamorous star to become a battle-hardened warrior, proving that while truth can be delayed by money, it can never be buried forever. Rose McGowan's sacrifice forced the world to witness the decay of distant titans. Yet as the spotlight finally illuminated those dark corners, the public was stunned to realize an even deeper, more persistent ache, the betrayal coming from those the victims once called family. 2. Dylan Farrow, shattered memories in the attic and the long road to justice.
And as I played with the toy train, I was sexually assaulted. As a 7-year-old, I would have said he touched my private part.
In the archives of the Connecticut State Police and Child Welfare investigative reports from the early 90s lies a case that forever changed public perception of the boundaries between family and child safety. This is the story of Dylan Farrow, the adoptive daughter of director Woody Allen. Far from the romantic narrative seen on screen, Dylan's testimony before forensic child psychologists painted a bleak picture of a profound betrayal of trust within her own home. The incident traces back to an August afternoon in 1992 at a home in Connecticut. According to detailed statements filed with law enforcement, Dylan, only 7 years old at the time, was led to a dark, cramped attic. In a cluttered room filled with everyday items, a deeply troubling incident was reported. In later interviews with trained investigators, Dylan recalled feeling overwhelming fear while being pressured into inappropriate behavior in an isolated area. The words of a 7-year-old girl then were not just fragmented memories. They were the reflection of a soul wounded by the very person she trusted most. Evidence of Dylan's exploitation lies not only in her direct testimony, but also in how the protective machinery surrounding the cinematic giant operated to obscure the truth. In later court records state, sociologists and psychologists noted classic signs of trauma, typical in children who have suffered abuse. However, the power of an A-list star allowed the investigation to be drawn out and disrupted by complex legal campaigns. Dylan was placed in a cruel predicament, a child's voice pitted against the media might and cultural influence of an intellectual icon. She was treated as a pawn in a bitter custody battle where a victim's true pain is often dismissed as a personal vendetta. The most subtle exploitation was the normalization of deviant behavior under the guise of art. Dylan later spoke out about feeling betrayed once more as the film industry continued to grant her adoptive father ultimate prestige. For decades, she lived in forced silence, watching the person who caused her nightmares being celebrated on the world's grandest stages. Investigative documents suggest that Woody Allen's later public relationship with Soon-Yi Previn, also an adoptive child in the family, served as circumstantial evidence reinforcing concerns about a pattern of predatory behavior toward young dependents. By 2014, through open letters and public hearings, Dylan Farrow directly demanded that justice re-examine the old files. Though the case did not lead to a criminal conviction due to statutes of limitations and decades-old procedural hurdles, her voice was recorded by child protection agencies as a piercing alarm. Dylan proved that whether a predator is a genius or a power player in Hollywood, a victim's pain is a truth that time can never erase. The truth of Dylan Farrow's dark attic shattered faith in the values of artistic families. Yet as female survivors strive to tear down the velvet curtain in another corner of Hollywood, a physically imposing man, a symbol of strength and masculinity, struggles with a similar shame, proving that power knows no gender when the hunt begins. 3. Brendan Fraser, The Tears of the Jungle King and the Cruel Retribution. In a world of legendary superheroes and treasure hunters, Brendan Fraser was once the embodiment of unparalleled strength and radiant charisma. But behind those chiseled muscles and that bright smile, an archival record at the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, HFPA, concealed a truth that shattered traditional standards of masculinity. Even a physically imposing man can become a prey. The incident occurred in the summer of 2003 during a lavish luncheon at the Beverly Hills Hotel. According to Brendan's direct testimony and subsequent internal investigations, he was approached by Philip Burke, the then powerful president of the HFPA. Amidst the grandeur, the lights, and the clinking of glasses, Burke committed an act of aggressive harassment in plain sight of the crowd. Brendan described that moment with utter shock. His left hand reaches around, cups me. It's moving around. Instead of anger, Brendan admitted he fell into a state of paralysis. A man who played saviors on screen suddenly felt small, trembling, and wanted to cry like a child. He rushed out of the room, passing laughing colleagues carrying a profound sense of shame that he didn't even know how to name. It was not just a physical violation, it was an assault on the dignity of a man at the pinnacle of his career. The evidence of Brendan's exploitation and the subsequent punishment proved to be the fatal blow. After demanding an official apology and reporting Burke's behavior to the HFPA leadership, Brendan realized his spotlight was beginning to dim. Professional records show that from being a box office guarantee, he was suddenly blacklisted by Hollywood from major projects. Movie offers withered, the phone stopped ringing, and his presence at major award ceremonies was erased. He was used as a cautionary tale in Hollywood: if you dare to stand against the gatekeepers, your career will pay the price with oblivion. This pain pushed Brendan into a downward spiral of depression that lasted nearly 2 decades. He blamed himself, believing he had done something wrong to deserve such treatment. During his years in seclusion, Brendan endured both physical and mental devastation, watching the world forget him, while the aggressor remained comfortably in a seat of power. It wasn't until 2018, as the movement for justice surged, that Brendan found the courage to stand before investigators once again and expose a scar that had never truly healed. Brendan Fraser's tears upon receiving public support after years of being cast aside are the clearest testament to the power of truth. He spoke up not just for himself, but for thousands of other men suffering in silence due to the prejudice that men cannot be victims. His recent glorious comeback is not just a cinematic triumph, but a powerful moral indictment of a system that once tried to bury him in the shadows. Brendan Fraser took nearly 20 years to find his voice again, amidst a Hollywood rife with power traps. But if his pain was the isolation of a career for another young girl from decades past, the abuse did not stop at her profession. It was a contract of modern-day slavery signed with the very innocence of a 15-year-old. 4. Beverly Aadland, the crushed camellia and the 15-year-old contract of servitude. In archival records of Hollywood's darker side in the 1950s, Beverly Aadland is not remembered as a rising star, but as a story that reflects the imbalance of power behind the glamour. In contrast to his charming on-screen image, Errol Flynn appears in various accounts as a more controversial figure associated with relationships that raised concerns. The story begins on the set of Warner Brothers, where Beverly was just 15 years old, carrying the familiar dream of entering the entertainment industry. According to her memoir, her encounter with Flynn quickly drew her into a very different world, one where fame came with significant influence and personal boundaries could easily become blurred. Beverly later recalled, "I was so young and he was someone everyone knew. I wasn't sure if I was really making a choice." Their relationship unfolded amid private gatherings and luxurious trips aboard the Zaka yacht. For someone not yet fully grown, these experiences were not only glamorous but also disorienting and overwhelming. What makes the story more complex is the role of those around her. Some accounts suggest that her family and the surrounding environment did not intervene, and in some ways accepted the situation in hopes it might open doors into high society. Over time, Beverly was no longer simply a young girl pursuing acting, but became part of Flynn's public life, appearing alongside him at events and during his travels. Her story, therefore, is not only about two individuals, but also reflects a period in Hollywood when fame and power could overshadow boundaries that should have been protected. The ultimate cruelty in this dossier is how Hollywood normalized this crime for so long. When Errol Flynn passed away in 1959, Beverly, then only 17 years old, faced public ostracism and relentless scrutiny from the authorities. In subsequent interrogation transcripts, she was treated as a co-conspirator rather than a victim. Beverly spent the rest of her life carrying a psychological scar that never healed, branded with the title of a legend's child mistress, when in reality, she was merely a child trapped within a professional, predatory system. Beverly Aadland's late-life cries serve as a searing indictment of old Hollywood, a place where innocence was crushed under the heels of power and fame. She was not just the victim of an individual, but the victim of a culture of silence that allowed men like Flynn to place themselves above the law. The tragedy of Beverly Aadland remains a permanent stain on the history of Golden Age Hollywood, a testament to how the spotlight can mask the most horrific crimes against children. Yet as society begins to awaken to the pain of past decades, we realize a chilling truth: even when a victim is grown and holds status power, still finds sophisticated ways to turn them into prisoners within their own marriages. 5. Lita Gray, the 50-page indictment and the prison called marriage. He did not look at me as a human being, but as a piece of property to be molded and discarded. This agonizing confession lies within the shocking 50-page divorce filing submitted to the Los Angeles court in 1927. Lita Gray, the second wife of Charlie Chaplin, broke her silence to expose a harrowing truth. Behind the gentle smile of the tramp was a ruthless manipulator who turned a teenager's life into an inescapable tragedy. It all began on the set of The Gold Rush, where Lita was a dream-filled 15-year-old girl. Chaplin leveraged his status as a cinematic god to exploit her innocence. When Lita became pregnant at 16, an age when she should have been in school, Chaplin coerced her into marriage in Mexico to evade criminal prosecution. For Lita, marriage was never a sanctuary. It was Chaplin's calculated escape plan. Throughout their years together, Lita testified in court to enduring relentless psychological abuse. Chaplin insulted her intellect, forced her into sensitive acts that violated moral standards, and threatened to destroy her family if she dared speak out. She was imprisoned in loneliness and fear within their lavish mansion, serving merely as a shield for her husband's pristine public image, while Hollywood branded her a lucky gold digger. The tears recorded in the dossier proved she was merely a pawn, crushed under the heel of a soulless genius. The peak of cruelty came when Chaplin utilized his massive media machine to smear Lita, turning her into a villain in the eyes of the public to protect his own glory. Despite this, with extraordinary courage, Lita fought to the end. That year's divorce settlement became a rare legal document that dared to record the pathological dark side of a global icon. Lita Gray's voice was a lonely but blazing fire, proving that even if a predator brings laughter to millions, the pain he inflicts on an individual remains an undeniable truth before justice. Lita Gray's indictment ripped through the mask of the king of comedy. But if victims in the classical era fought with ink and paper, the battle in the age of modern gentlemen is even more grueling, where predators use their own charm to assassinate public trust. 6. Susan Braudy. When fame becomes the blade that assassinates dignity. I knew that if I spoke out, the world would believe him over me. This bitter reflection from Susan Braudy targets more than just misconduct. It exposes the sheer helplessness of an individual against absolute power. A writer and sharp executive, Susan never imagined she would become a victim within Michael Douglas's own script-reading office in the 1980s. The nightmare began in a state of shock when the Oscar-winning gentleman abruptly engaged in perverse and indecent behavior right in front of her. Susan described a suffocating sense of revulsion witnessing an idol to millions acting with such crude, utter contempt for women. Instead of an apology when she resisted, Douglas responded with insults and direct threats to her career. The moment she stepped out of that room, Susan realized she hadn't just lost a job. She was facing a force that could erase her honor with a mere snap of its fingers. The true cruelty lay in the ruthless, preemptive strike Douglas launched the moment he learned Susan was preparing to go public. According to media tracking records of that time, he used his legendary aura and prestigious family lineage to assassinate her character before her story could even hit the shelves. Douglas proactively appeared in major publications branding Susan a fabricator and an extortionist in the court of public opinion. Susan was reduced to a cheap labor tool, her intellect exploited and then discarded into total isolation. The doors of Hollywood slammed shut one by one, turning her into a prisoner of silence for 30 long years. Susan Braudy's battle was not just against a single act of indecency, but against an entire system programmed to protect the powerful. It took 3 decades until the explosion of the justice movement for the world to finally hear her voice behind the glossy PR articles. Susan proved a bitter truth. In Hollywood, sometimes the most dangerous weapon is not violence, but the power of fame used to stifle the voices of the vulnerable. Susan Braudy had to wait half a lifetime to reclaim her buried dignity. But if Michael Douglas's power lay in the media, then for the martial arts heroes, on-screen power was wielded through the intimidation of weapons and auditions turned into deadly traps. 7. Portia de Rossi and Juliana Margulies. The Nightmare. Under the gun of the righteous martial artist. In official statements filed with the authorities, the dossiers on Steven Seagal are more than just stories of misconduct. They are chilling accounts of intimidation involving weapons. Far from his on-screen persona of a righteous warrior fighting for justice, the testimonies of actresses like Juliana Margulies and Portia de Rossi depict a hunting ground, rife with brutality hidden behind the guise of art. Juliana Margulies, star of The Good Wife, has never forgotten that fateful night when she was 23. According to investigative files, a female assistant led her to Seagal's hotel room at 10 p.m. under the pretext of a script discussion. But as the door closed, reality fractured, there was no script. What met Juliana's eyes was Seagal sitting there nonchalantly resting a real handgun on the table. In her sworn deposition, Juliana described the feeling of her blood turning to ice, her chest tightening as if the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. She stood there paralyzed and trembling, realizing she hadn't come for an audition, but to face a silent, life-or-death confrontation. Seagal exploited a young woman's absolute terror to maintain total control, turning a hotel suite into a psychological prison filled with the scent of gunpowder. The cruelty continued with Portia de Rossi during an audition at his private office. She described the horrific psychological unraveling as Seagal began manipulating her with talk of the chemistry required for the film. The moment he slowly unzipped his trousers right in front of her, Portia felt her career and self-respect being crushed. It was a sophisticated form of mental torture. Seagal took the professional aspirations of young women hostage, forcing them to accept humiliation as the price for a life-changing opportunity. According to reports from artist protection organizations, the victims were trapped in a tragic dilemma. They wanted to scream to flee, but the gun on the table and Seagal's massive stature stifled any will to resist. Juliana recounted having to find a way to escape in a state of sheer panic, carrying with her the ghost of the possessive gaze from a man the whole world was celebrating. Their accusations tore through the mask of the dignified martial artist. Seagal may teach about justice on film, but in reality, he used intimidation to trample upon the dignity of solitary young women. The intimidation of Steven Seagal turned auditions into horrific memories. But if Seagal used weapons to control in another corner of Las Vegas, a muscular icon used absolute power to threaten, he would crush the head of a victim if she dared to utter a word about the dark secrets behind the velvet curtain. 8. The massage therapists, silence bought by underground forces. In the 2012 civil litigation files of the Los Angeles court, a disturbing pattern of behavior unmasked the dark side of the charismatic John Travolta. According to lawsuits filed by massage therapists identified as John Doe to protect their identities, Travolta frequently scheduled private treatments after midnight, the hour when hotel supervision is at its weakest. The victims described a horrific scenario. As soon as the session began, the actor would abruptly expose himself and engage in aggressive, non-consensual contact. In their official testimonies, these professionals expressed a sense of profound humiliation. They arrived to perform a specialized service only to be reduced to mere tools for the gratification of an A-list star. One victim tearfully recalled the feeling of being trapped in a confined space where Travolta's immense power and wealth rendered every no utterly hopeless. They suffered a deep wounding of their self-respect as the boundary between a professional worker and an object of harassment was erased under the guise of elite privilege. The true crushing pressure arrived the moment they sought to report the incidents. According to their attorneys, the victims faced a ruthless damage control machine from the Church of Scientology, an organization in which Travolta holds a high-ranking position. They were intimidated by private investigators, subjected to character assassination, and professionally isolated. Economic power and religious influence were utilized as a vice to strangle consent, forcing these therapists to choose between staying silent to keep their livelihoods or being crushed by an underground empire. Although these lawsuits typically concluded with confidential settlements and ironclad non-disclosure agreements, the victims' testimonies left an irreparable crack in Travolta's public image. It serves as a bitter testament to the reality of Hollywood. When money combines with underground forces, the truth becomes a commodity that can be bought, and the pain of ordinary workers is treated as a small price to pay for preserving a star's aura. While these cases often ended in the silence of settlement agreements, the massage therapist's testimonies have left a permanent stain on Travolta's legacy. It illustrates that in Hollywood, when wealth joins hands with shadowy organizations, the truth can be purchased at a very low price. John Travolta's silent contracts have proven that power can suffocate the truth for decades. But sometimes darkness does not just hide behind underground forces. It also exists right under the veneer of wisdom and moral teachings from a monument respected by the entire world. 9. The Interns, when the voice of God becomes a lingering nightmare. Internal investigative reports from major studios have unmasked a grim reality behind the dignified facade of legend Morgan Freeman. Without resorting to overt violence, Freeman was accused of transforming the workplace into a high-pressure environment through inappropriate remarks and repeated non-consensual touching. According to testimonies from 16 individuals, the voice of God was in fact a psychological shadow haunting young subordinates. The most prominent account came from a production intern on the film Going in Style. She described a sense of profound humiliation as the veteran star repeatedly asked suggestive questions about her body in front of colleagues. Evidence of this exploitation lies in how Freeman leveraged his status as a living monument to normalize misconduct, masking it as jokes that no one dared to challenge for fear of sabotaging their careers. The true cruelty was not a single assault, but a lingering culture of fear. Assistants recalled developing a strange defense mechanism, wearing baggy, oversized clothes just to avoid Freeman's scrutinizing gaze. They were used as objects to satisfy the whims of a powerful man who believed his immense fame placed him above all moral boundaries. While Freeman later issued an apology, the testimonies of 16 people painted a dark portrait behind the lens. It serves as a costly lesson on how power can be used to stifle the safety of the most vulnerable in the workplace. The collapse of Morgan Freeman's image proves that backstage whispers can sometimes be more terrifying than loud screams. But as the sitcom lights fade, a staggering realization emerges: some use not just fame, but blind faith to walk free with their crimes for decades in plain sight. 10 dossiers, 10 tear-filled journeys from darkness into the light. These direct accounts prove that no matter how brilliant the red carpet glow, it can never forever hide the scars of abused power. The courage of these survivors has closed the era of silence, ensuring Hollywood is no longer a legal vacuum. The truth has prevailed, and justice, however delayed, has finally begun. If you believe the truth must be spread to protect the vulnerable, please help us by subscribing and sharing this video. Don't forget to leave a comment on the story that haunted you the most. Your voice is the most powerful weapon to stop the darkness from repeating. Thank you for listening.